Okay, everybody, hello and welcome. Nice to see so many of you here. My name is Denise Agosto. I am the director of the Masters in Science and Information at Drexel University's College of Computing and Informatics. Welcome to today's Hiring Outlook for Information Professionals webinar. This is our fifth in a series of webinars that I've been running since April of 2020. Letting people in the waiting room here. This is our fifth in our series, and the idea in these webinars is to bring people from the wide range of information professionals in to talk about their roles, their jobs, their view on the information professionals, and anything they'd like to tell us about this wide-ranging field. I should also mention that today's session is also partly hosted by the Center for the Study of Libraries, Information Society, which is also located at Drexel. Today's guests are Liza Vick, who is our neighbor next door at the University of Pennsylvania, where she is the head of the Albrecht Music Library. So welcome, Liza. And Daniella Lowenberg, who is not necessarily our neighbor. She's way on the other side of the country in California, where she is product manager for the California Digital Library. We're going to start out with Liza Vick. Hello, and thank you for joining.
Hi. Thank you, Professor Agosto. I'm going to share my screen, so bear with me 1 minute while I do that. Okay, and can anyone not hear me? Okay, all right, good. I'm going to assume everyone can. So my talk is just about 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you for having me again. My name is Liza Vick, as Denise just said, and I'm here to talk to you about music librarianship. My brief talk is in two parts. I'm first going to introduce myself, my career path, and what I do on a daily basis. And then I'm going to introduce you briefly to the larger field of music librarianship and our national association, which is the Music Library Association. And we will hopefully have a couple of minutes for questions. And for some reason, I can't advance my slide. Let me try. Denise, do you have any idea why I wouldn't be able to advance the slide?
I don't. Anybody with any genius suggestions? Let's crowdsource it.
You might have a pop-up window on another screen that needs to be resolved, or?
Right. Okay, let me try stopping just for 1 second.
The other option, you could also send me your slides, and then I can hit advance if you can't.
That would work too. Yeah. Okay. Oops. Okay. All right. Sorry about this, everyone.
No worries.
Or, okay, what I'm going to do is just drop the link into the chat and see if that helps. I'll give you a minute to. Does that open for you?
Here it is. Give me a sec. I have to sign into Google.
Sure. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I figured it's probably faster than sending in my PowerPoint slides.
Then I sent a request for you to give me access.
Whoops. Okay, sorry everyone. I didn't realize that was going to happen. All right, sorry about this. Quickly. All right, if this fails, I'll just start talking. But I think we're going to get it.
Let's see.
Okay, come on. Being slow.
Come
on. Okay, hopefully that helps. Just in case.
Yes, got it.
Okay, that looks promising.
Yay. So if you just tell me then.
Yeah. Okay, it looks like it's working. All right, sorry everyone.
No worries. Slideshow.
Okay. So as I was saying, my career path and the Music Library Association, starting with my career path, which is on the next slide. So I went to undergraduate school at Westchester University, which is right down the road if you live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's near Philly. I was a flute performance major, and then I eventually made my way to graduate school at the University of Maryland, College Park. I got a master's degree in ethnomusicology, and I also got a master's degree in library science. I also got a job as a student assistant at the music library on campus, and that was really key because that was how I figured out that I loved reference and public services, and that's kind of what kickstarted me on that path. My first professional job was at Library of Congress as a digital conversion specialist. DC is near University of Maryland, and so that's how that happened. I had connections there. It was not a librarian position, so I started job hunting as soon as I graduated. And my first professional position was at the University of California, Irvine as a research librarian for the performing arts. And they added German language and literature later on. That's something that can happen in your future jobs. You can sometimes expect the unexpected. And that was in a general library that had music stacks. So I'll be touching on the different job scenarios a little bit later. I very much wanted to be in a specialized music library. So after 4 years, I started looking for those kinds of jobs, and I landed at Harvard University in the Ida Kuhn-Loeb Music Library, where I was music reference and research services librarian. And what that means is I supervised public services and did a lot of reference and instruction. And I spent 10 years there. I very much wanted to lead a music library. So I left for the University of Pennsylvania, which also happens to be near where I grew up. And it was just a very appealing job. And so I landed at Penn in 2016. And I have an extremely long job title, which is head of the Otto E. Albrecht Music Library in Eugene, Ormandy Music and Media Center. You might be wondering what that means and what I do on a daily basis. So I'll just briefly describe that. I support a very academic and very small music department. So it's not a huge music school. They don't have performance. They have academic study of composition theory, ethnomusicology, and historical musicology. So I spend a lot of time doing collection development, buying books, journals, scores, and sound recordings and media. I also spend a lot of time doing reference consultations and instruction, and just the day-to-day running of the music library, which means supervising 5 staff, one of whom is part-time, supervising the facility, and we're located in the main library at Penn. It's a little bit different from Irvine. We're in the Van Pelt main library, but we are a departmental library. We are a unit within that library. And I supervise our technical services and, as I said, our media center, which includes circulating sound recordings and videos. I also do fun things like organizing an informal concert series, hosting book talk events, curating exhibits, and serving on lots of committees and teams. And you can go to the next slide, please. So I'll just tell you a little bit next about our field at large and where music librarians work. And I'm going to keep this short because I know we already lost a little bit of time there. So the link to the music librarianship page on the MLA website is on this slide, and it tells you a lot about our mission and our profession. types of jobs, training, core competencies, etc. But I just am highlighting 3 of the main job types. Academic libraries is where you find the vast majority of music librarians in different scenarios, like head of a branch, as a research librarian, a cataloger, and in a very small libraries, one might do all of these things, maybe a jack of all trades. Most jobs also intersect with digital humanities, scholarly communications, and copyright. Public libraries also, some of them have music librarians. They might be a head of a collection in a big place like New York Public Library, or they might be a generalist librarian working with music materials. And there are performance ensemble librarians who are dealing with rentals of scores and sets, who work with military bands or as orchestra librarians. And next slide, please. You might be wondering how to prepare for music librarianship. So any music background helps, because knowledge of types of music scores and notation and general knowledge is really helpful for dealing with our clientele. An ALA accredited library degree, as I'm sure you've already heard 1,000 times, is required for the vast majority of jobs. And I realize a lot of you probably have jobs already, so some of this is geared at students. And a second master's in music helps, but it is not at all required. I mean, a bachelor's degree is wonderful, music knowledge is helpful, but 2 masters are no longer the norm. Library school programs include those with dual degree programs with musicology, an MLS with music specialization, an MLS without specialization, but with the ability to take independent study in music librarianship, which is what I did at Maryland. There is a listing on our website, which is unfortunately down right now, but there is a library school program directory, and you can feel free to email me later and I'll send it to you when it's back up. MLA offers, next slide, please. We offer many valuable services to all music librarians at all stages, but particularly for students and early career members. For instance, we offer students and early career folks discounted membership rates for joining the association and also for our annual meetings. So the current student rate is $65, and we offered an emergency pay what you can rate this year during the COVID crisis. And student membership includes our newsletter and journal. And you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Excellent. Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped ahead a little bit too quickly. If we could, yeah, great, perfect. We also offer students and early career folks a couple of grants and scholarships. These are the 2 biggest, and I will describe them because I think they're worth hearing about. The Diversity Scholarship. The goal of the scholarship is to recruit students from historically underrepresented racial and ethnic groups into music librarianship by providing support for master's level LIS education. Students who have applied to or are enrolled in ALA accredited program with a concentration, certificate, course, or career interest in music librarianship are eligible. The Kevin Freeman Travel Grant provides funds to support the cost of attending the conference, which would normally be registration, hotel, travel. Of course, this year we're meeting virtually just like everyone else. The applicant must be, and I'm quoting so you get all the information, a regular paraprofessional or student member of the MLA and either be 1, in the first 3 years of their career, 2, a graduate library school student aspiring to become a music librarian, or 3, a recent graduate within 1 year of degree of a grad program in librarianship who is seeking a professional position as a music librarian. At least 1 grant will be awarded to a first-time attendee, if applicable. At least 1 grant will be awarded to an individual from an underrepresented minority group. And recipients of the Diversity Scholarship are strongly encouraged to also apply for the Freeman Grant. Now I'm ready for the next slide, for real. So you might be wondering how to find a job in music librarianship. MLA also offers a wonderful placement service and robust career mentoring activities. So newly advertised positions are posted on our MLA listserv, and you can easily find how to sign up for that on the website. And employers often network and meet potential candidates for preliminary interviews at the conference, in addition to the usual campus visit or Zoom visit, day-long full interview. Jobs are also posted to the online searchable placement service, and they tend to be posted very, very quickly after the point where a job has opened. And the next slide, please. So while we're talking about the conference, please consider joining us online for our annual meeting, which is in the first week of March. We also offer a reception for first-time attendees. It's generally the first night. In this case, will be before the conference starts or on day one. We're a very, very friendly group, and we also offer conference mentoring for first-time attendees. And the next slide. MLA Career Advisory Service offers valuable services such as resume review by experienced and friendly and kind music librarians. Career advisory page lists advisor bios and backgrounds and descriptions of the services so you can scope people out. The career resources page offers voluminous information about many aspects of job searching in our field in particular. And the next slide, please. MLA also offers professional development at all career stages. So that career advisory that I just mentioned also offers like mid-career counseling. See our listing of upcoming webinars hosted by ALA with music librarians as instructors. They include Introduction to Music Librarianship, as you can see, music cataloging, collection development, and music reference. And you can sign up for those individually or as a bundle. And the last slide, when you have a chance. So in conclusion, just a few key job hunting tips, and I can get into more detail in the Q&A. Networking is very important. And as I keep emphasizing, we are a kind and friendly group. Get intern and volunteer work if you possibly can. Get practice interviewing, get your application materials critiqued, and tailor to the individual posting. Like, the most important thing you can do is tailor it to show that you are truly interested in that precise job that you're applying for, as opposed to a more generic approach. Music librarians tend to be very enthusiastic about what we do, and MLA members are warm and welcoming and want you to succeed. So the focus on all of this is very constructive. Although we may sound rather traditional, we do focus on innovations like learning design, educational technology, open access, and digital scholarship, among many other things. It's a very exciting field. And I've listed my name and contact information here so that you can get in touch with me later. Denise, did you want to do a couple questions now, or would you rather move ahead? Totally up to you. And you're
Sure, I think it makes sense for people to ask a couple of questions now, and then we can take more at the end. If anyone has questions, you can type them into the chat box, which disappeared, and I will try to find it.
I can see it, so keep an eye on it.
Well, I do have a question. How many members are there of MLA?
We are currently at about 600, I
Oh,
believe. The conferences in general used to get about 400, 450 people in attendance. It's very hard to say this year, but so we are the smallest of the MLAs. We're much smaller than the Modern Language Association, and then there's the Medical Librarianship Association. But it's a very, I think the key advantage is the fact that you can actually network and get to know a lot of people fairly quickly.
Let's see. Okay, we have a question. Do you want to read that one? Can you see it?
I can. Is any tips on how can music librarians go about upskilling CPD in this age of fast-changing IT milieu? That's a really good point. I'm going to have to ask what you meant by CPD. Is that computing? You can either speak up or type.
Continuing professional development?
Thank you. That makes sense. Yes, that is an extremely good idea. I mean, I know for someone like me, when I entered the field, scholarly communications was not yet a thing. There are a lot of areas that you need, and digital humanities, and it's definitely a good idea to like take webinars, take trainings, go to conferences. People get additional degrees or certificates if that's something that's realistic for you. Very smart to continuously upskill and be as flexible as you can possibly be. We're a very niche field, and so there are good chances that you will end up having other responsibilities added to your job, or having a job that isn't just music, but is other arts, or maybe other fields entirely, or you might also be the outreach librarian, or you might be the head of tech services, things like that.
We got another question here. How did you decide to study both ethnomusicology as well as library information science for your graduate degree? Had you already been interested in a music librarianship career?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I did the library degree first. I did them back to back, but I did the library school first. And I did know that I wanted to be a music librarian because I had the music background. I liked music and I liked research, and I definitely wanted to combine those two. And at that time, this is way back in the 90s, at that time you really did need a second master's in music. And I was just intrigued by world music. Maryland had a good program, so I could have done musicology. Those are the two most common master's degrees for a librarian to have. Musicology, which is historical music history, or ethnomusicology. And I simply was much more interested in world music and more intrigued by that.
Let's see, we have another question. Other than MLA, what would you recommend as sources for relevant webinars or professional development?
Definitely ALA. ALA is very applicable, even though they don't have, unless you're a cataloger, there are not a lot of ALA meetings to attend, but it's still extremely generally useful, meaning they don't have a lot of, meetings devoted to music librarians specifically. They have arts groups, they have a dance librarians group, but all of their, I would say a lot of their professional development is aimed for, will be helpful, because really any skills you can develop in the library field are going to help you be a music librarian and then be flexible throughout your career. Let's see another one. Would you like me to read?
One more, go for it.
Okay. It says, does the interdisciplinary nature of information science as a discipline have any appreciable impact on music librarianship as a professional field? Oh, wow. Okay, we've got a lot of questions here. Yeah, I think that Arjun, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I hope I am. I apologize if I'm not. If I'm understanding that correctly, yes, I think essentially any or all of the cases classes, not cases, that you're taking in library school should be extremely applicable to music librarianship. the music knowledge is helpful, but it's kind of an add-on. It's not, it's still like we're all coming from the same general professional base. And if I didn't precisely address your question, feel free to let me know or email me later, and I'm happy to follow up. Okay, and then for someone interested in general cataloging, do you recommend learning how to catalog music as well? Yes. And that's where you would want to look for a program. Well, for one thing, ALA is great for that because ALA has a bigger, has a lot of cataloging programming. But MLA also has something called the Cataloging and Metadata Committee and MOOG, which puts on a whole pre-conference, many years, music OCLC users group for music catalogers specifically. But yes, you want to there are a lot of unique ins and outs to music cataloging. So you'd want to just research like independent study or a concentration, some kind of reciprocal, maybe an online course that you could take somewhere like Indiana or Illinois to get that knowledge.
Great, thank you. Really interesting. And thank you to our questioners as well. So now we'll take a turn to a different area of the field, talk to Daniella Lowenberg, who is product manager for California Digital Library.
All right, thanks so much for having me. Hopefully this will all work as expected. Here we go. So yeah, my name is Daniella. I work at the California Digital Library, which is at the University of California. And I've taken a bit of a different career path with respect to working in libraries. And so I'm going to talk primarily today about the digital library's role in open data. And my current roles, product manager is a little easier to wrap it up into, but I'm the product manager for a data repository. I also am the director of a couple of different initiatives around open data. And so, yeah, I hope this is interesting in terms of maybe how to translate less traditional scholarly outputs. So a little bit about me. My training is in microbiology. I did my research on antibiotic resistance and then a bit on the genetics of chemotherapy. And I realized that I'm much too extroverted to be in a lab. And so I like talking about science more than I liked being in the lab all day. And so I looked out to communications in science. And I started working at the Public Library of Science, PLOS. And so PLOS is an open access publisher and founded in San Francisco, where I am. And I had joined to be a publications manager, so working on the publishing side of things. But within the first couple of weeks, they noted that they wanted to start for PLOS to be the first mega open access journal to have a data policy, which meant that when you would publish your article, you would also have to publish any of that data. And so I jumped on that as something I was interested in, mostly because I felt a little funny being in publishing with a science background, not being an editor, and I was familiar with some of those data they were talking about. So I spent 4 years at PLOS overseeing the data policy and working across the journals and working with the various editors and researchers around the world that contributed to PLOS on that. But while doing that, I realized that I really cared about open data, and I could see the reach of how much opening up data could affect both science advancement, but also just society in general. And so looking outward to the institutions that were leading that, I found a role at California Digital Library. And so I've been there since, and that role has morphed a bit, but for those who aren't as familiar with California Digital Library, we sit across the University of California system, and we have 4 main programs. So there's the open access and publishing, so library publishing and the institutional repository for all the articles for UC's OA policy. There's the collections group. They also have made the news a lot lately if you're familiar with University of California cutting the contract with Elsevier. That is this group. There's also the discovery and cataloging and delivery shared interlibrary loan across the University of California. And then there's our group. And for some reason we have a logo, and we're called UC3, and we're the UC Curation Center. And if you're familiar at all with anything in the research data world, here's some of the logos of the services and projects that we run on the UC3 team. And so it's really around data management, identifiers, data skills training. And while we're focused on University of California, all these projects are global in scope because to best meet researcher needs, the library's role is to have that be more global because research is global and can't be done just on the campus. So I've mentioned open data a couple times. What do I actually mean by that? This are a couple of screenshots to kind of show the moment that we're in. Open data is required at this point for science, for transparency, for reproducibility, for trust in science, but also for the government. Think about government data, think about all the access to the climate data, to the vaccine data. We're seeing open data being called on more and more, especially with the incoming administration. And so not only is this something about scientific research, but it's also about the government and just those policies. And these may be specific to America in their screenshot, but globally, these are conversations that are happening in every country at different levels. They're happening across the governments in the countries as well. And so we're seeing this drastic change across in the last decade. And then, of course, publishers and our federal institutions started to require this. And so there's both the good reasons why we should care about things being transparent and open, but also because now our mandates are coming through. And so the libraries are playing a really big role on campuses right now to help researchers understand what resources they have to meet these mandates, and also how best to. And libraries have been paving the way in best practices around curation. I see that Dr. Greenberg's on the call, and she's been leading the way in metadata curation for so long. And so the libraries do play this really important role in this larger research community. And so in the areas of this that I focus on, because advocacy can't just be an idea, there's kind of three main areas that I focus on: data curation, data publishing, the incentives and evaluation of open research data, and then the ethics of publishing these data. So I just have a slide on each to go through on those. The first is data curation and data publishing. Again, Dr. Greenberg was really involved in the beginning of Dryad. Dryad is the data repository that I am a product manager for. It is a global open data publishing platform with over 36,000 data sets. In 2018, Dryad partnered with the California Digital Library. Dryad was its own organization and still is, but partnered with CDL because we began to understand that there are these really great services that researchers use, but they need to be more connected to the library and institutional values. And so with this partnership, we've launched a library membership model. And so we're driving membership across the world right now, connecting libraries and institutions to their researchers. And so Dryad has had mass adoption for over a decade now, and now we actually get to see the libraries play a role in this. We see at Columbia and at UBC and others that they're, connecting in and having everything from Dryad from their institution show up in their SILs and in their collections and in their IR. And so really trying to understand research data as an actual output that we should be valuing. And so this whole space around data repositories has grown. Data curation, there are massive initiatives around it. Dryad is just one example, but there's a lot of work right now into best practices and how we can use this type of publishing to accelerate science. And so the libraries, there's tons of opportunities in that right now. Then the next step is, all right, so the data's been published. How do we actually evaluate the return on investment and the reach of these data? Most importantly, how do we eventually get to the point of having credit for data? If we want tenure and promotion committees to start acknowledging data as something that's as important or more important than having a really great article, then we need some way to evaluate it. And so I'm the director of an initiative called Make Data Count. You can find our website at makedatacount.org, Make Data Count, the Twitter. And these are just links to our recent announcements. But basically what this whole initiative is a group of infrastructure providers, bibliometricians around the world, and researchers, and we're working together to build the technical and social infrastructure for data metrics. So when you go to a repository and you see views and downloads, how can we normalize that? So we've come up with a code of practice for how repositories can have trusted numbers for that. But most importantly is this new advancement around having bibliometric studies around it. So what is it? How do in different fields do people use that in, say, humanities or music research? How are they citing data versus folks in cancer biology? It's going to be very different. And so we want to work up to having transparent, open metrics instead of just defaulting to some sort of metric that made sense for another type of output. And data is a little tricky. So that's kind of where we're working on that. And so a lot of that advocacy is within the funding organizations and the repositories. And it seems to be coming up more and more as something people are interested in. And then lastly, this is new news, but we have started to dive into the ethics of publishing data. And so we have just launched a FORCE working group. FORCE is a community around people interested in scholarly communications. And if you're interested in scholarly communications, you should join FORCE. It's free, it's an open community. It's libraries, publishers, institutions, repositories. There's tons of working groups that you can join. There is no barrier for you to join and work on those working groups. We have just launched this one. We actually have not put out any announcements about it yet because we're still in the works, but I thought it was exciting to share. Basically, we have agreed upon ethics principles for publishing. Say, if you published a flawed study, or we just saw that there was that trouble with political folks submitting fake COVID research to try and prove something about it. There's ways and workflows you handle it, but data publishing is new. And so we need ethics principles around how we're going to handle data that's public. What happens if we're publishing scientifically flawed data? What if we publish human information? How do we handle that? Are we going to flag it? Do we not flag it? And so this group is going to be aimed at coming up with those workflows and having a community consensus on that. And so with all that, those are just 3 different kinds of areas, but there's so much happening in the open research data space. The libraries are playing such a role in it. It's a growing field. I wouldn't even say it's scholarly communications. It seems like it's growing its own communities through the Research Data Alliance, the Research Data and Preservation, RDAP groups. Tons of working groups if you're interested in joining them. They're always looking for fellows and folks that are interested in getting into this space. Data librarians are being hired across the world in different roles under different titles. And it's clear how important it is to have data curators at the institutions as well. So if you have any questions about research data, I'd be happy to connect you to the right people or show you other working groups that you can join. And here's some of my contact information here.
Great, thank you. Very interesting. Let's see, do we have questions? While people are thinking of questions, I wanted to ask about the PLOS funding structure. Can you explain a little bit about how you're supporting open access through funding structures?
At PLOS? I can't hear, sorry.
Yeah, specifically, how is PLOS funded, and how do you get your operating funds?
I don't work at PLOS anymore, so it's probably
I'm
not
sorry.
for me to refer to that. But PLOS was an innovative in their models for article processing.
Oh, I understand. Okay, great, thanks. Let's see.
So it looks like there's a question typed in about thoughts on how university libraries can pursue in-depth engagement with the open data agenda to further the idea of open scholarship. The university libraries, it seems like, are finally starting to acknowledge that this is an important space to start hiring in and put more efforts into. I think there's a couple ways. One that I mentioned, which is hiring data curators and data librarians that can be resources on campuses to researchers and liaise within various disciplines to help them understand their mandates, their fund, like, what their funder is requiring, how to do this. There's also ways that libraries can join memberships and put resources into community open projects around this. So thinking about initiatives and working groups and having university representation there. But I think there are growing opportunities for the libraries to really lead this space.
Let's see, a question came in that is just tagged to me, so let's see if I can read it. This is so interesting. 2 questions. Are institutional review boards taking a role in developing these ethical standards? And have there been efforts to use data metrics in tenure applications so far?
So the IRBs have not gotten involved in the data ethics yet. One thing we found in the publishing side was that the IRBs and ethics committees were really difficult to get a hold of when we were reporting things that happened at the institution and the research. So we are targeting research integrity officers and others to join the start of this working group, so we have their buy-in early. But it is a good point that there needs to be better guidance. UC Irvine had a workshop recently that I was at, and it was a bunch of researchers in education, and they were saying, like, our IRB is not giving us enough information on what data we can publish. And so it's also clear there needs to be a lot of guidance around that. And then the second question about data metrics, no, we have not seen those as a thing that institutions are using yet, but we also maybe wouldn't expect to or wouldn't want to, because we don't actually know what the metrics are yet. What's a little freakier is that we've seen some efforts globally that are pushing for a data impact factor, which, for those who aren't familiar, is a very outdated way to assess someone's performance based on the journal that they published in. And so we're really trying to avoid those kinds of perverse incentives in the data space. It looks like 2 more questions here. Do you have suggestions of job titles to search? Additionally, suggestions of non-higher ed spaces. So there's a lot of nonprofits in this space that are leading the way, that are hiring, that would love to have folks with your background in it. Searching maybe specifically if you can join various communities, like try and join working groups if you're specifically interested in data, like the Research Data Alliance, RDAP. If you're interested in Earth Data, Earth Science Information Partners, they're always posting jobs in those communities. They have Slack channels, and so it's a great way to find them. For job titles to search, I would say data curator, data librarian, research data management. Those would be some terms. Yeah. What kind of technological skills are most important to your work, and what kind of things would you advise librarians on? Technological skills. My role might be a little different in that I'm a product manager, so I'm had to learn GitHub and some code and things like that to make sure that we can run an open source project, and I run a team of developers. So probably not as necessary in terms of advocacy. I would say it's pretty low bar on technology skills, and it's an accessible space for that, especially because a lot of this work is global, and so maybe people that aren't as resourced as we are here with the types of technology that we have access to. But focusing on, I think, just looking at the carpentries, if you're interested in data carpentry, software carpentry, they have awesome lessons. Or you could look at becoming certified as a carpentries instructor, and that would be a really great thing to add to your resume if you're interested in this space. And then I got a private question. Once the data curation is completed by your organization, does your organization continuously keep the data curated, or does the data curation end after being published? Yeah, so say for instance, Dryad, they have a team of curators, they curate it and then it's published. But unlike curation and peer review are two different things. So if something could still come up post-publication, like curators aren't validating the science. And so that might come up post-publication, and it's something that people are going to have to assess. But Dryad does version, data is versioned all the time. And so curation is kind of always happening when there's a new version of that, or when people are adding to their data sets. We see, NASA is streaming data all the time, and it's being curated as it's updated. And then Jane says, can you comment on the importance of working with teams with members that have different backgrounds? Your background is in science, but you work with many other people. Yes, definitely. I feel like this, the reason why things in this space can be so accessible is because the teams are not all people with the same types of training and background, and we really have to speak to understand what we're working on. So, most folks that I work with don't have a background in science, librarianship, information sciences, maybe software and development backgrounds, some sciences, some others. And so it's really important to understand common language, how we can work together on it, how we have similar things that we want to work to, but we have to keep the jargon low and make sure that we're all speaking in a language that makes sense. And not just assuming that we're all scientists or we all have a library background. I found the opposite. I don't have a library background. So when I'm working in library communities and folks are speaking about things that I should know, that's a barrier as well. So it goes both ways, just making sure that we're all, focusing on the end goal and not maybe things that we assume people would know.
Great. Do we have questions now for either Liza or Daniella? Oh, here comes a question. This one looks like it's for Daniella.
Some scholarly communication students at university have a council deal with copyright and intellectual property. Do you think that will increase? Yeah, the copyright and intellectual property is so interesting and comes up all the time. University of California has an Office of Scholarly Communication, and so I sit on it to represent data, but it's folks like Academic Senate and other people at CDL and the libraries, and I feel like copyright and intellectual property comes up all the time in both what you're cataloging, but in what's being published, and data, even that's like the ever fight of what should data be copyrighted. So I hope that they hire more in those areas at libraries. I think it's the more education on it, the better, and the more that people are talking about it.
Liza, you were nodding at that. Do you have issues that often come up related to copyright or intellectual property?
Whoops, yes. So we, hi Edith, by the way, Edith and I work together. We do have a new counsel in the Office of General Counsel at Penn who is working with the librarians to keep us all up to date on fair use and copyright laws. I've taken fairly extensive basic copyright training. I'm certainly not a lawyer, but I've had a pretty good grounding in fair use. The sound recording copyright is very, very tricky. And I've just found it incredibly valuable to keep on, we were mentioning upskilling earlier, just to really keep upskilling in the area of copyright and fair use, because you just can't know enough. I also wanted to just mention something I should have mentioned earlier is there is a music librarians student group that is an offshoot and separate from MLA. Their website is sadly also down right now. We're having problems with one of our web providers, and it's very frustrating. But when the website is back up, you can Google ML Step, MLSTEP, and I can also send the link to Professor Agosto. I see another.
I see one more question for each of you here. Liza, do you want to take it first? Okay.
Sorry, well, I missed the last thing you said.
There's one more question for each of you. Let's see, and now there's another one. So maybe, actually, Daniela, keep these in order. With this open data content at the university, can you discuss some stipulations that are involved? Does it mean anyone can access and share content and expand on source availability?
Yeah, so most of the data, at least, so Dryads is all copyright CC0, which means that no one owns the data. And we're seeing more and more that repositories are doing that as well. This is the best thing for institutions because technically the institution owns the data in most cases, like at UC. And what that says is that when you're publishing it, anyone can reuse that data. Anyone can build on it. There's no barriers to access of that. But then you would ask that people cite that when they're building on it. But the point really is to not have stipulations or use agreements or anything like that if the data can be public. So if it was, medical records, that shouldn't be there. But other types of data we would hope are completely open, being reused, being built on. Just having data available doesn't advance science. When it's being reused on, it does.
Great. Then the question for Liza. Can you comment on anything with the publication of music research data? Ooh, interesting. Is this something you've heard about?
Yes, I mean, data it's less of an emphasis for music librarians, but it's an emerging field. So I would say, and for that reason, I'm certainly much less knowledgeable about it than Daniella, but I'm learning, and I'm actually on a strategic planning working group at Penn that's looking at collections as data. But in terms of publishing music research data, music librarians go through the typical scenario where if you are going to study human subjects and publish results, you have to go through the IRB process to survey people and then publish results. And beyond that, it's very much emerging. I do know there are some musicologists who do like computational studies of music. And if they're gonna like extract data and say study melodic form or use of words in specific pieces of music, they tend to use things that are out of copyright. So I'm not sure if that exactly addresses your question, but that's my answer. And I can point you to people who would probably be more knowledgeable if you want to email me.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.
There's one more question. In your experience, how has the shift to predominantly e-resources during COVID-19 affected the conversation around copyright? Ooh, that's a tough one. Does either of you want to take a stab?
I'm just conscious of giving Daniella time if she wants to answer.
It has not been affected, so I don't have an answer.
It's been an awkward issue for us at Penn because our council is pretty conservative. And so we're sort of limited. For instance, we have digitization on demand during COVID, but it's only 10% of a book or a chapter of a book. And for instance, when it comes to music scores, that's not terribly useful because if someone's going to perform from a score, they need the whole thing, not just 10%. So we luckily also have pickup at Penn, where patrons can still check out the physical material. But the copyright is definitely tricky. And also means we can't just rip audio tracks and provide them for the same reason. Also because we don't have the staffing for it, but it's definitely a challenge. It's a major challenge.
We just have a couple minutes left. Here's the next question. Daniella, the two for you here. Do you want to tackle those maybe? We have just a couple minutes left.
Yeah, so in the wake of the COVID pandemic, has there been renewed enthusiasm or flip in the way open data agenda? There's been a lot of talk about that. I have been less of a believer that COVID changes that, because I think that there are many crises that have already proven that open data is required, like the climate crisis and economics and others. But so I feel like I keep getting quoted in things saying that the COVID hasn't changed that. But yes, it's very important. COVID has shown that people want to see the data. And so hopefully that keeps driving more reason. I just don't want the script to be because of COVID, because we've been needing open data for decades. And can you please clarify who's looking for fellows? So RDA usually has opportunities for students to join, and they can be like the liaisons to working groups and start learning that way. The Earth Science Information Partners, ESIP, also lurks if you're interested in earth sciences. And then RDAP, RDAP is a librarian-led group on research, data, and preservation, and they have a lot of opportunities as well.
Well, great. We're right on the edge of our time. So thank you so much to Liza and Daniella. Very exciting. I learned a lot. Interesting to see how within one broad profession, your jobs can be so different. And yet there also are some core underlying concepts that remain the same across fields. Thank you for everybody attending. And oh, wait. Advertisement time. We have our next two series in the section. For our next two series in this Outlook and Information Professions, we'll be focusing on human-computer action, HCI and UX. Our next webinar will be January 26th from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern, free, open to the public, featuring Tianu Lang of Oculus Virtual Reality, Christine Scheller of O3 World, and Jean Zhang of AstraZeneca, talking about user design and interface work. And then February 23rd from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock Eastern, we will have Michael Dickard of Vanguard, Diana Kusowski from White Ops, and Cheong Nugent of Philly Kai and Comcast, again, talking about HCI and related user research. So thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.